Welcome back. We are here with Kris Drewry, who has the book Breakup Positive. Wow, people are like, yeah, right. I mean, how do you do that when money's involved, when homes are involved, when all this? How do you break up positive?
I'm not coming in to be the downer this morning. I'm like, breakups, I'm here.
But you're doing it positive because it is so hard. And I know from your personal experience, you had it all. The TV career, the successful blog, the relationship. Everybody thought it was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that, even to back up, breakups, we are taught, society teaches us that breakups need to be these devastating, awful, life-ending things. And they can be that for a period of time because you're mourning a loss of some kind. But then I think you owe it to yourself, and this is why I wrote the book, you owe it to yourself to take a step back and say, you know what, there's good that can come from this. Maybe you were in a relationship that wasn't the best for you. Maybe you weren't happy and you didn't know it. And I think you owe it to yourself to find a positive kind of throughout all the negatives. And that's not to say you won't have your bad days, you won't have your sad days. You just can't let yourself sit in those places for a long period of time.
So when did you flip that switch for you? Because I mean, of course, there's those 2 miserable martini weeks where you're like, life is over. How do you flip that?
I think I just really, and I had that. I had we've all been there. We've been really sad. You can't get out of bed. You can't do it. And I would do these little things almost immediately. I'd have those days where I'm like, I can't function. And then you have these things where I'd like make myself go out and get a coffee. I would always work out. And it didn't have to be crazy like boot camp spin classes because you lose your appetite a little bit. So I would make sure.
Or you gain your appetite.
Or you eat your feelings. But I would make
I'm not that girl. I don't lose my appetite ever.
I think you just have to make sure you have a plan every day that you can mentally handle. It doesn't have to be something crazy. It can be, I'm gonna run out and grab something to make myself for dinner. I'm gonna meet a friend for coffee. I'm gonna go to a workout class. They have to be these small things. And you just have to be kind to yourself. And you have to let yourself feel sad.
Mm-hmm. So true. From a human beingness perspective, we have to be right at some core level in our mentality. We have to be right. So whether we're leaving a job, whether we're leaving a relationship, at some level we have to justify that division. And I think it's typical, and I went through a really hard breakup some years back, and I remember being really pissed off. Like I was sad, I was all this stuff, and I had to make him so wrong in my consciousness. But when I realized it was actually just a grieving.
Yes.
And when I realized I still loved him, even though I knew I didn't want to be with him, that's when the chains, and I was able to get back to the positive breakup.
Well, and I think that we are, again, as a society, we're taught hate your ex, blame them for everything. And I think there's something actually really powerful in saying, I had 50% of this. I need to take credit almost for like the things that I did wrong as well. And I think there's also something really powerful. Maybe you won't be best friends with an ex, but I think there's something amazing about, even a year later, 2 years later, being able to check in and be like, I hope you're doing well, and actually mean it. Be able to say happy birthday and actually mean it.
Though?
You have to go through the process. Like you said, you have to go through the grieving, you have to go through the anger. And I think eventually you have to create a life for yourself that's better than what you were experiencing before. And so happiness is a big part of that. And that does involve, I speak about it in the book, traveling, getting yourself out of your comfort zone, taking stock of all of the relationships that you have in your life. Because this is not just a romantic breakup book. When you go through a romantic breakup, you also need to look at the friendships that you're allowing into your life, the professional relationships you're allowing into your life. Because if you're letting yourself, be in a relationship that's not great for you romantically, you're probably also letting those kinds of things into your life in small ways in the other relationships that you're experiencing.
And then even more ways because you've got the room and the space for it. When you lose that romantic other half of you and you've got this extra time and this extra heart space, it's interesting because even in a transition I'm going through right now, you get flooded, right, with opportunities and not even just potential romantic partners, but in business, in new friends, and people just
the time,
seeking you. Absolutely. But you have to be selective in that. For me, I don't know where that line is because it's like, oh, I've got the time now.
Well, and I think you just have to really look at what's healthy for me, what's good for me, what's going to make me happy, what doesn't feel like an obligation. Because I also think when we go through a breakup, we surround ourselves with distractions. And I think it's
Guilty.
It's super important. That's totally fine in the beginning, but you have to kind of take a step back and be like, you know what, I've been doing this for like a month. I've been going out. I've been distracting myself with kind of all of these things. I need a little bit of quiet space, even if it's just to sit down and journal every day, to journal in the morning, to journal at night, and really take a step back. And for me, writing was something where I could have all of those distractions, but I'd take an hour to myself a day to sit down and write and to go back. I even go back now and read the things that I was going through just to see how far I've come, if I'm letting negativity back into my life. And I think it's just a really powerful thing.
Right.
From that writing, is that where the book came from?
That is where the book came from. And I think a lot of my journaling came from a very painful place, but the book comes from a very happy place. I got myself to a very happy, amazing place, and then I wrote the book because I wanted the book to be positive and happy, not vindictive. So
I love that, and it brings up such a great question, I think, which is, you know, the difference between sort of journaling and it being a cathartic kind of experience versus moving into a place of like positivity. Right. So how do you know when to make that shift, or how do you know when you should really be focused on just letting it all out versus focusing on something like gratitude?
I think that journaling, especially for me, but I believe that it should be for other people, it should be your safe space. It should be, you can wake up every morning and say, I feel awful. It should just be a safe place. No one's going to read it but you. You know, you put it away. And that's what it would do for me. I would journal out all of the anger and the hate and the sadness so I could set it aside and get to a place of gratitude in like daily life. And I found that the days that I wasn't writing or the days that I wasn't getting that out, those negative thoughts would kind of follow me through the day.
It's interesting though, because it doesn't seem safe to me, journaling. I don't want to put it down on paper because that makes it real. I'd rather live in my head, bury it in my heart, I don't have time to deal, because if I put it on the page, that is real.
It makes it real. And I think that, you know, going through a breakup or detoxing friends out of our lives, they're very real and painful things. And I just can't stress again, I think journaling is journaling or a good therapist.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
honestly.
and that's the question I have, because when I was going through, getting through this breakup, I realized that I had to stop talking about it. Like there was a point where I would go to my girlfriends, I'd be like, oh, and he did this and did it, and I was like, this was years ago, and I remember being like, oh, this is energizing. So I had to like keep it for either, a mentor and keep it with somebody who's going to hold me accountable and actually do the work, or journal or whatever. And I had to not energize it with, talking about all the drama with my girlfriends. What do you tell people about that?
It's crazy that you brought that up, because I literally have an entire chapter in that book.
We all
that book right there.
We all have those friends that all they do is talk about the breakup, and you're like, I'm just tired. I don't want to hear about this anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know for myself personally, and I write about it in the book, I made a rule that I would only talk to and get advice from my therapist. And there's so many amazing ways these days that we can, go to therapy, have your insurance pay for it. There's cheaper options for it. But I used my girlfriends as a way to do things like that would make me happy. I didn't use them as sounding boards because they care about you, and your friends, whatever, men, women, they care about you, so they have a vested interest in making you feel better.
Completely.
And that advice isn't always the best advice. And they're also going off of their personal experiences. So maybe one of them went through a bad breakup and they got cheated on and this and that. So they're trying to convince you to hate your ex. So I made it a point. I talk to my therapist. I get advice from her. I journal. I use my friends, the ones that I kept in my life. I use them as a way to do positive things, workouts, coffees, just to call and be like, I'm feeling really sad right now. I don't necessarily need advice from you. I just need you to listen to me.
Totally.
What about a burn bin? Just write down, put it all in a burn bin and light a match?
That's where her
like
journals
that.
are going to go.
Yeah.
Send it to the universe. Transform
Kelsey,
it.
so in the house you find me, darling, I need a birthday, okay?
I love that. And forgiveness, self-forgiveness. How do you walk people through? Because I think that's the biggest part of all of it is self-forgiveness.
Absolutely. I think you go through, whether you were the one that left or the one that initiated it, you're going to hit a place at some point where you question your decisions, where you're incredibly sad and you can beat yourself up. I definitely went through that. And I think it's just, I can't stress enough being kind to yourself, showing yourself self-love. And I know maybe that sounds ridiculous, maybe it sounds cliche, but it's just okay sometimes to be like, you're okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Take stock in how you're feeling. Try not to think too much about the other person because they're going through the same thing and they're getting, advice from multiple people or maybe a therapist. And I think sometimes it's okay just to tell yourself it's fine and let it sit.
So great. So how can people find your book? Can they work with you also? One-on-one,
Definitely.
or-
I don't know if I call myself a breakup coach, but I've definitely helped many women going through and people going through different breakups. I run retreats.
And you're engaged, right?
I am engaged.
That's good.
So
We're not
kind of
just
my
some
own
hater
success
and be
story.
like, breakups, right?
So they can find me at Kris Drewry on Instagram, and then the book Breakup Positive. The easiest way to get it is how we all get everything, and it's on Amazon.
Amazon. I love your Amazon, for sure.
Thank you so much for being
Thank
here
you for
today, for
having me.
helping me break up positive.
And we have to give a shout out to Sandra Lee because we met at Dr. Pimple Popper's luncheon, girls
Bringing
event,
people
right?
together.
So,
Oh,
right?
yes, thank you, Kate from Morgan Publicity,
Yeah,
for
Kate,
inviting
we
us
love you.
both. We love you. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more on Good Morning La La Land.